I'm Andrew Schiff, CEO at the Rhode Island Community Food Bank. Thank you for joining us today for our town hall with Kathleen Cloutier, the Executive Director of Dorcas International. Dorcas International will have their Centennial Celebration on June 23rd, marking 100 years of providing citizenship and immigration services, refugee resettlement, adult education, language learning, job training, and much more. Today, Dorcas International is a multi-service organization serving all Rhode Islanders, in addition to those who are foreign-born. And you're going to be hearing a lot more about Dorcas International in a moment. First, I just want to mention that today's presentation is available in Spanish translation. So if you want to listen in Spanish, find the interpretation icon. Looks like a globe. Click on it and select Spanish. Also, at any time during today's presentation, if you'd like to ask a question, type your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll make sure to save time at the end to answer all of your questions. We are really glad at the Food Bank to have a strong partnership with Dorcas International. And you'll be hearing about how we've worked together this year to help the recently arrived individuals and families from Afghanistan. It's given us an opportunity to really learn a lot more about all the services that Dorcas International provides. It's also given us the opportunity to learn about the different experience that immigrants, refugees, evacuees have in coming to Rhode Island, and everything that's expected to them on the road to citizenship. And we just thought this town hall would be a great opportunity to share and to learn with all of you, the Food Bank's donors and supporters and followers. And that's why we're just so thrilled to have with us today the Executive Director, Kathleen Cloutier. Kathy, welcome.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was a wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. I don't even have to speak. You just said everything there was to say.
I just want to, before you get going, we're going to turn the show over to you, but before you get going, I just want to say thank you to you and your staff for the amazing job that you did in welcoming hundreds of people from Afghanistan this year.
Well, you're very welcome, Andrew, but honestly, we could not have done it without partners like you, the Rhode Island Food Bank, as well as the whole community in Rhode Island. So it's a village it takes a village, I think is what they say. Thank you. Thank you.
I'll let you take it away.
Thanks. So I'm going to share just a few slides to give some context in terms of Refugee Resettlement, the organization, and then, but I'm most interested in hearing what the audience really wants to hear about. Again, Andrew did a wonderful introduction, so I don't have to reintroduce who we are. But really, and he's also mentioned our centennial. So it's been since 1921. We took a pandemic year off before celebrating. But really, what we've really tried to do since the merger between Dorcas Place and the International Institute of Rhode Island in 2013 is that we're really trying to fully integrate our services so that people can overcome whatever barriers there are. And as I said, as Andrew mentioned, we serve everyone. We serve primarily, most of our clients are foreign-born refugees who we've resettled, or immigrants who have come here on their own. But we also, because we have a lot of job training programs, employment services and supports, we do work with everyone anyone who's born in Rhode Island as well. So this is just a list of some of the programming that we have. Again, there's a whole lot more that goes on. These are just kind of the service areas, but we really do have multiple programs and grants that support all of this kind of work here. But when we talk, we're most well known, I think, in Rhode Island for resettlement of refugees. And it's currently, in the last 5 years or so, we've been the only refugee resettlement agency in Rhode Island. Prior to that, and with the arrival of Afghans, the Catholic diocese has been involved. However, we're the largest of the refugee resettlement agencies when there's more than one. And when you think about refugees, they're different from immigrants in that they're forcibly displaced from their homes. Immigrants often will have choice in terms of when they leave and where they go. Refugees, however, have no choice. They're fleeing violence, persecution, a whole range of traumatic difficulties. And so they're forcibly displaced and they really don't know where they're going to end up. So last year, the United Nations High Commission of Refugees, which is the United Nations organization that oversees the refugee resettlement across the globe, 84 million people were displaced forcibly. Again, we're seeing it on TV every night in the Ukraine. We saw it in Afghanistan. We've seen it on TV all over. And however, of those 84 million people, only 25% of them are actually identified as refugees by the United Nations, which entitles them to the support of the United Nations in terms of being resettled. 5% are asylum seekers. But really, there's 70% of these 84 million people have no status. So technically, if you think of the folks in Poland who fled the Ukraine, they're in Poland, but they don't have any official immigration status in Poland currently, right? There's a humanitarian effort going on, but legally, they are not considered refugees at this point. So again, it just gives you a picture of that limbo that so many people are living in without really knowing what's going to happen. Again, the refugee resettlement process takes minimally 2 years to be identified as a refugee. Oftentimes, however, it could be up to 20 or more years before refugees are resettled into their permanent home country. Now, when you think of the refugees coming to the United States, this past year, the President Biden had identified 125,000, that we would welcome 125,000 refugees. We've already welcomed almost 85,000 Afghans. There are others who are coming since October, but when you think of the 125,000 as compared to this 84 million, or even the 20 million who are identified as refugees, it really is only a drop in the bucket, which is why folks often end up in refugee camps for years and years and years in this kind of limbo. Now, if we take it from the US down to Rhode Island, again, because of the influx of the numbers of Afghans, we've resettled 319 Afghans here in Rhode Island, as well as an additional 55 refugees from other places. We're also going to be welcoming, probably before the end of September, another 40 to 50 refugees. And we're expecting Ukrainians to come in the next 3 to 6 months. And we really don't have any information in terms of how many and whether, how many are coming to the Rhode Island and when they're coming over that period. But one of the things that have happened with Afghanistan that is not the normal process is that, again, 319 Afghans were resettled in Rhode Island in the matter of about 4 months. Normally, in Rhode Island, we would be resettling 150 to 200 individuals over the course of 12 months. So that's what made it so important for are getting help from the Rhode Island Food Bank and others to be able to help us with this number. The capacity number was much more than we would have been able to manage on our own. So again, thank you very much to the community for stepping up. And again, I've just listed some countries here besides Afghanistan from who we've been resettling from in the last, probably the last year or so. Again, it's a very diverse group coming in. And I've often been asked if there are any differences in terms of if there's differences in resettling different groups of people and what those might be. And so I found this great chart on the United Nations website. One of the things that makes sense, if you were to think about it, is successful integration into anywhere in the US really depends on how closely your home country's culture is aligned with the culture in the US. And this chart is actually a Human Development Index. It's a chart of the score, the ratings for the Human Development Index, which includes all of these things: educational level, poverty level of the country, and compares it or rates it based on where a country falls in these criteria. And if you take a look at where the US is, the US has a very low score for the Human Development Index. And if you think about how well the Ukrainians are going to be able to integrate, this is an indicator that Ukrainians will have some difficulty. Again, their culture is different, but it's not as different as, say, for instance, the Afghans, which you see at the bottom there. So this is, I just find this fascinating in terms of really understanding why it may be easier or more difficult for folks to fully integrate. But there's other integration determinants, such as, again, with Ukrainians, the likelihood of returning home. If that's in the back of your mind, then you may not be predisposed to fully integrate into the US. You'll be thinking more about going back home, versus someone who may have a family tie to a US citizen who's living here. Likely that will make it a little more easy for someone to feel comfortable. Again, here are some other determinants around the socio-demographic and the resettlement location, whether they're resettling in a location that's urban or rural, what the unemployment rate is here, and quite frankly, are there co-nationals already living here? One of the examples I use often is that in 2016, when the Syrian refugee crisis was happening, Governor Raimondo stepped out, was one of the first governors to step out and say, we welcome Syrians. Well, we were one of the first states to actually welcome Syrians, primarily because we already had a very large Syrian American immigrant population. The Syrians who had come over in the 70s and 80s had fully integrated into the US, were able to really support the new Syrians coming in a way that was much more successful in helping them integrate. So again, this is just some information in terms of the challenges and the relative ease with which folks, relative I say because it's never easy to resettle, relative ease or difficulty with which folks find resettlement in Rhode Island. And again, these are just some of the external factors outside of Rhode Island that will have some impact on. If someone has been in a refugee camp for 20 years, has never had the opportunity to work, then moving to the US and trying to get a job in order to keep your family self-sufficient is going to be much, much more difficult than someone who left Afghanistan employed, but only left 5 months ago. Those folks will have a much easier time thinking about employment than someone who's not had that ability. And again, the conditions across the globe are full range, right? It can be anywhere from living in an urban apartment to living in a tent on the desert. So these are some of the factors. There's also, as I mentioned, Rhode Island factors. When I first came to the organization in 2013, the unemployment rate was one of the highest in the country here. And so trying to find refugees work was much more difficult than it is, say, for instance, now. Same thing with that ethnicity group, the culture group represented, how different minimum wages from the cost of living in terms of the ability to take care of your basic needs, and housing, the availability of housing. As we mentioned with the Afghan arrivals, housing has been a huge problem for us in terms of finding housing that's not only safe, but is affordable. And thankfully, Rhode Island stepped up, and we were able to raise $1.7 million to assist these Afghans with their housing and other basic needs costs. And I want to say, I mean, this was in partnership with the Rhode Island Foundation, as well as the governor's office and others. But this has made all the difference in terms of our ability to, as I said, successfully resettle as many people as we did in such a short period of time. I also want to mention that the $1.7 million is not going to staffing. It's not going to administration. 100% of these funds are going to directly assist the Afghans to help them offset the cost of rent, to help them with their training programs, ensure that they're able to meet their basic needs, their transportation, because not everyone is being resettled in Providence. But often we're asking folks to travel to Providence to sign up for benefits or to come to our offices. And so that's where these funds are going. And it should be able to support these Afghans for the 2 years that they are here under temporary status. We also received almost $1 million worth of household items and furnishings from the community, as well as we had hundreds of volunteers that were helping both set up apartments, welcome new neighbors. We had children and adults writing welcoming cards and messages for folks that we would have in their home when we brought them home from the airport. And that was heartwarming to see when those messages were translated for the new arrivals. It was really, they were very touched, seriously. But most importantly, and this is what I'm hoping to, as we think about resettling Ukrainians and others in the future, that one of the things we were able to do is to work with other organizations, such as the Food Bank, to really help us fill in the gaps with where the services are. And as I think Andrew will share with you a little later, the Rhode Island Food Bank was instrumental in helping create culturally appropriate food boxes and then delivering them to each new arrival's home. And this was unprecedented in our experience with resettlement. So again, I can't thank the Rhode Island Food Bank staff and supporters enough for all of this. Again, this is just some contact information for us. We can certainly share some of this information in the chat if you need that. But as Andrew mentioned, we do have our Centennial Celebration on June 23rd. If you go to our website and go to the Centennial page, I believe that's in the chat, you can buy tickets. This is a community event. This is not a fundraiser event. Tickets will be held to a small price, cover the cost of food. And this is really a celebration of our 100th birthday. So we want everyone to come. It shouldn't be restricted. We'll have global music, world music, global food. It really should be a wonderful time. So I encourage everyone to come. We also have a special event on May 5th, just honoring the legacy that Dorcas Place gave to the Dorcas International Institute. They would have been celebrating their 40th anniversary this year, and so we'll have a special honor of Sister Mary Riley, who founded that Dorcas Place 40 years ago. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much. And I will be open to questions for anyone.
Thank you, Kathy. I have a question. Thank you for that overview. It was really helpful. And it just made me think about the contrast between what you were describing about often refugees in camps for years, which is heartbreaking. And yet the arrivals from Afghanistan, it seemed like it for them, it was so fast. And even though, getting here, I'm sure, made them feel safe and protected, I wonder if the little time that they had to prepare was also traumatic.
It was, not everyone who arrived had worked with the troops over in Afghanistan. Those who did may have been a little more familiar with the military bases where they were housed for quite a few months before they came to Rhode Island. And just again, most refugees flee with little more than what's on their back, but that real shift, like you said, was traumatic for some. One of the things that is making it more difficult for the particular Afghans in arriving, one of the reasons, so one of the shortcuts, I guess, in terms of how quickly they came, was that they weren't given full immigration status to be here. Part of what takes so long is that when refugees come from day one, they're on their pathway to citizenship and they're entitled to whatever you and I are entitled to. And this particular group is not, which was why we were really concerned with resettling someone temporarily for 2 years. So a lot of some of this 1.7 million is going to go to immigration legal services to help them apply for asylum so that they can stay here permanently.
Thank you. I think we have a few slides that we can show too about the food assistance that we were able to get to the Afghan arrivals, newly arrived folks. We, one of the things that you talked about is that for so many people coming all at once, that they were placed all over the state.
Right.
And so one of the challenges was to figure out how to make sure that they are all getting food assistance. So we worked really closely with you, with We Share Hope, with Catholic Charities, the Diocese of Providence, to make sure that we were actually able to deliver the food. I think we have another slide. We also wanted to make sure that the food that we were providing was culturally appropriate. And we want folks, particularly when they're first here, to receive food that's familiar to them. And we could take the next slide. That included halal meat, which is not in every grocery store, and also pretty expensive. So we found that being able to provide halal meat to the families made a real difference. And again, it's food that's an obligation for them in terms of both culture and religion. And then I think we could jump to the next slide. Next.
Wow.
And then you see the total amount. We were only able to do that, as Kathy was saying, because of really, really generous support from the public. We also wanted to make sure that in addition to the food that we were providing in these food deliveries, along with the halal meat, that we were also providing gift cards to the supermarket, because it's really important for newly arrived families to begin to use the supermarket and get used to it, because that's going to be where their food is going to come from, particularly once they're able to get SNAP benefits. And we were able to do that with generous help from Stop and Shop. And we also provided bus passes because folks don't have cars. And so they needed a way to get to the supermarket. We were able to provide that too. But really, as Kathy was saying, all of this was only possible because of a tremendous response from the public, from donors who saw that this was a group of people who really needed our help.
Mhm.
Now, Kathy, I have another question for you, I think. Thank you. You know, as folks are here, now they've been here a few months, what are the expectations, even with temporary status, in terms of finding work and that kind of thing?
So even with temporary status, everyone has been able to secure a work permit. And I would say most of the arrivals who came are currently now working. If in fact there's some health issues or some other barriers to getting work, most everyone has since found work. We have moved everyone into permanent housing. We were using host families and others to offer temporary housing, which could be several months temporary, but now we've got plans to, I think all but maybe a few families are still in their temporary, long-term temporary, but we're securing housing for each of them. Again, so the idea will be that we will, as folks are able to earn more money, that we will be weaning them from the financial support so that they can, feel like they're fully self-sufficient, taking care of their families as well. But recognizing that because of the housing expense, it may take a little longer than normally would. But yeah, everyone is expected to be, all working age adults are expected to be working, and most of them currently are.
I hope everybody appreciates how unbelievable it is that over 300 people are in permanent housing. They've been able to work in just this really short period of time. Mm-hmm. It's remarkable, and it's testament to your staff and volunteers, everything that you've done to help them.
Well, I appreciate that, Andrew. But again, as I keep saying, we could not have done any of this without folks like you and your team, as well as the community supports. But again, this is what we do. We have the knowledge. We just needed the ability to gain capacity, if you will, to do it in such a short time. And I will say that, we've learned a lot over this time. You think your systems are working until, you 300 people in a matter of months. So we found some cracks. We're fixing them now as we speak, because we do expect the Ukrainians may be coming. Again, I have no idea, but I expect they may be coming at that same pace in order to provide some support for those overseas. But yeah, so.
Well, Kathy, we're going to take questions from the audience in a second, but before we do, I have one more question, and that is, what happened in Afghanistan was an emergency. What's happening in Ukraine because of the war is clearly a crisis. But there are lots of refugees waiting to be able to resettle. And has the Biden administration committed generally to opening up doors to more refugee resettlement, more immigrants?
they haven't officially. Do I think this administration is more open? Again, some of the pandemic restrictions are being loosened and that kind of thing. And we have been resettling refugees in between the Afghan, as Afghans were arriving. We just resettled a few families from Syria and the Congo just in the last few days, a week or so. So that will continue. I do think that there is a recognition that the United States can go back into a leadership role with regards to resettlement and immigration in general. Again, it's difficult sometimes because people have different opinions in terms of, but part of the combination of the previous administration policy changes and the pandemic really shut down the resettlement system worldwide. And so it had taken us this much time to kind of rebuild it, not necessarily in our organization, but the system, the United Nations system of vetting. Again, because refugees are so vetted so thoroughly, is that 2-year time frame, right? Because if you flee home with nothing but what's on your back, you may not have your documentation that proves who you are, all of that. But the system, I think, is up and running, which is, again, I think the US government learned a lot from their ability to resettle so many Afghans so quickly that I'm optimistic that things will progress at a higher level than they have in the past.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, now I'd like to introduce our Chief Philanthropy Officer, Lisa Roth Blackman. Lisa has been monitoring the questions in the Q&A box, and welcome, Lisa.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Kathy. There's a lot of great questions here, so I'm going to try to combine and consolidate where I can. But just to pick up on, Kathy, what you were saying most recently, there are a bunch of questions to clarify what age is somebody entitled to a work permit and what kinds of jobs are the folks who have just arrived, the Afghan refugees, doing, and is their job training? Like, what does that process look like in a little bit more detail?
Oh, okay, great, thanks. So generally we say 18 and over. So as an adult, refugees are expected to work, and they can, and many of them had applied for their work permit while they were still on the US bases. So by the time they came to Rhode Island, the work permit was available, if not within a few weeks. And so in terms of the kinds of jobs that folks are getting, it really depends on, there are a lot of jobs out there. It depends on their level of English proficiency. Again, some of these folks worked as interpreters or translators for the military, and their English is proficient. We've hired some of them ourselves in terms of jobs to help us do some interpreting and facilitating with those arrivals that don't have full language proficiency. What we do so we do provide both English language learning as well as job training in a range of fields. We also partner with agencies that do job training as well, depending on, and part of what happens is we do a full-blown assessment of, what did you do in Afghanistan? What are you interested in doing? Recognizing that there may be differences in the expectations or the licensing, and so if you were a doctor in Afghanistan, you're not going to be a doctor here, but let's think about what kind of entree you can get into the medical field. And so it's a wide range combination, I would say, for this particular group, because there were so many who did have a high level of proficiency in English. And there are so many employers that are wanting to help as well, right? So they're where they may not have been open to someone with less English proficiency, just in terms of communication, they're doing what they can to ensure that they make room for new arrivals in terms of roles. We often, hospitality is a big area. We've really had a lot of success with warehouse distribution. We've got some big warehouses close by, and those actually tend to pay relatively well considered versus the hospitality. But we do try to match people to their interests as well.
Great. And there's one of our questioners mentions Beautiful Day in Providence, an organization that provides job training for immigrants and refugees, and is asking, are there other small to medium-sized organizations that are doing that, where people might look into providing additional support for these the families who are arriving?
That's right. Yeah, Beautiful Day is one of our great partners, and we tend to refer folks who have very little work experience because Beautiful Day does a wonderful job in terms of introducing people to the American work culture, hands-on while they're being paid, right? It's a wonderful. We also partner with the Refugee Dream Center, who does very similar work with all refugees as well, English job training. We work with Women's Refugee Health, which does a combination of case management supports as well as helping people look for work. In addition to the more traditional, I would say, job training and employment programming. So we do try to connect people to what I would call mainstream supports in terms of enrolling and training and those programs. And we've actually had been developing partnerships over the years. So we do have some of those that we work with as well.
Great. There's a few different questions about the sponsorship concept that's been in the news, and how do people sign up to be a sponsor. So I wonder if you could just sort of explain what that is, and then if there is opportunities for people to get involved, maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm still trying to get clarity from a legal perspective. Our attorneys are scrambling, trying to figure out how that works. There are certain forms that need to be completed in order to sponsor a humanitarian parolee. Now with the Afghans, we were their sponsor. So we were able to, we as an organization were their sponsor, as opposed to an individual family. There has been some expansion. I think there was a small group we were working with or in communication with that was doing a sponsorship of one or two families. It was, and I'm not sure exactly how that worked. We got some paperwork, but I think it may be, you have to have information about the person that will be arriving or the family that will be arriving. And I'm not sure if you have to have prior knowledge or not. So we're working on trying to find out more about that. I do think the US government is recognizing that as an alternative. Again, when organizations like ours reach capacity, how else can we support folks doing that? We do have some information on our website about those sponsorship forms and some FAQs, if you will, around the sponsorship that people can check out and hopefully get the information they're looking for.
Okay, and is that the same as if you would want to host a family? You mentioned early on that you found host families initially until you found housing. So I don't know if there's a distinction you want to make there.
There is a distinction. The sponsorship is, in my understanding, is a financial relationship that you are willing to financially support someone coming in. What we were doing is working with folks to host and or mentor families or groups of people to host or mentor, more as like a neighbor who wants to help, so welcoming someone. So we had folks hosting arrivals in their own homes. They maybe had an in-law apartment or a bedroom or something like that. And we used that as part of our temporary housing. It was never meant to be permanent. But I think the sponsorship is a more formal support of the individual or the family, whoever's coming in.
And
Yeah, I was
Is
going to
there
say there
info
are.
on your- Go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, Evelyn, I'm sorry. There is, like as an organization, as a sponsor, we do get some federal funds to help us support that person, meaning that the individual refugee has federal funds that are allocated to them to offset some of the costs. So I don't know how that works with private sponsorship. I'm guessing there would be some resource available for that as well. I'm sorry to interrupt. So.
That's okay. Are you looking for families, and is this on your website, looking for people to continue to provide that temporary housing for either Afghan or Ukrainian or any other families that are coming?
Yes, I mean, you know, again, the housing situation isn't really getting any easier. So the pace has slowed down. So it isn't as much of a, we're not in as much of a panic. But if you do have, you know, a home or a space that you'd like to rent or that you'd like to host, please, please notify us, and we'll try to keep that in mind. And the same with mentors or volunteers to support new arrivals. We're continuing to do training for volunteers who just want to, you know, kind of be that friend or mentor rather than necessarily have folks live with them. But yeah, we certainly, any interest that's out there, we'll grab it and follow up with you as well.
Great. And you've talked a lot about the housing. Are you just looking on the open market? Where are you finding housing for the folks as you settle them more permanently?
Yeah, we are on the open market, and because of all the sales going on, the market rents are going up. We normally would have been paying less than market in South Providence, for instance, but because of the shortage, the prices are all going up, and so that's where we're looking. As an organization, we have engaged in a strategy where we will be looking at investing ourselves in purchasing / really developing new housing, specifically for refugees in that first year of arrival, so that we're not having to fundraise $1 million every year to offset the cost of rent.
And related, there's a question about where folks who are resettling access healthcare and primary care services.
Right. So a refugee and the normal process for resettlement of refugees are from day one, they're eligible for Medicaid, state-supported health source RI, based on their income, because they have no income when they arrive. So they're eligible for health care. Immediately as soon as we can, after arrival, we arrange for health screenings for everyone in the family, children to ensure they have their vaccinations, but really health screenings across the board. We have a wonderful relationship with Hasbro Children's Hospital with their refugee clinic, and some of the other health centers have refugee clinics as well that assist us with that. But refugees are entitled to medical insurance from day one, as were the Afghans. Although they were identified as humanitarian parolees, the federal government allowed that they could enroll in federal benefits like Medicaid as well.
Got it. All right, there's a few questions I'm going to try to combine a little bit again here about children who come, especially if they come alone, and what their experience is. What are the ages of most of the Afghan refugees, and what coordination with the school system? How do we help get them acclimated back into educational settings?
That's great questions all combined. So with with what we call unaccompanied minors, or the youth who are coming on their own, we actually do have a program at Dorcas International that supports. So generally what happens with those youth is they're housed in a shelter until a sponsor is identified. And generally that sponsor is a friend or a relative of the family, of the child's family. Not always, but most of the time it is. And for those sponsors who are identified in Rhode Island, we work with both the sponsor family, the sponsor, and the youth when they arrive to ensure that it's a smooth transition. There's no financial, again, different than refugees. The sponsor is financially responsible for that youth, but often are struggling with resources themselves. And so we provide that kind of case management to ensure that there's a smooth transition for an add to the family. For the Afghans specifically in terms of the ages, let me back up. Normally, when refugees arrive, I would say 50% of the refugees that come to Rhode Island are under 18, so the children enrolled in school. With the Afghans, it was different. Many of the folks who came were single young males who were doing the work for the US military and doing the interpreting and translation. So we had far less children than we would normally. However, we did have families with children, and we do in terms of when refugees are arriving throughout. We have a very strong relationship with some of the school districts, Providence being the largest. It's where we resettle most families with children. And we also have a youth advocate. So we have case managers working with the whole family, but this youth advocate is advocating on behalf of the children, both with the school and the family. So act as a liaison, because often with cultural differences, the family doesn't recognize what the school is expecting of them and vice versa. So, and we provide for some of the new districts, because people were being housed all over the state, we did quite a bit of training, cultural orientation for the school staff, so that they knew what to expect when the children were being enrolled. And then, yeah, so again, we continue to work with, the schools have resources as well for multilingual learners, but when a new culture, new language come in, there's some adjustment, and that's kind of where we come in as well to, as an organization, to support the district, because in effect, that's helping the family. Let me see.
And how quickly do kids who don't speak English get into school, and are, how quickly, what's their English language training, and how are they able to actually learn in school and while they're learning the language at the same time?
Great question. So they do. The younger the child is, the more quickly their language learning is, generally speaking. The difficulty most often happens when you have children who have an interrupted learning. So again, it didn't happen so much with Afghans, maybe with the Afghan young women, but those who are sitting in refugee camp for 20 years or other situations where they have to go to work at age 12 or 13, and then they come to the US and enroll in school as a teenager, those youth often have more difficulty both learning the language and learning because they've missed years of education. So that's, and so we work specifically with them in a newcomer program, both to overlay their education experience with some of the supports we offer to adults, like job training and case management services, so that they're more ready to, when they leave high school, are more ready to kind of enter in as an adult immigrant. With the young children, however, and I use this story all the time, we have on-site Head Start preschool program at our location, early Head Start and Head Start. And there was a refugee, little girl from the Congo. No, she was from Syria. And her best friend in the Head Start class, 4-year-olds, was a child from Colombia, a refugee from Colombia. And they were best friends. And so the teacher was explaining to me that while they're both learning English, they're each learning Arabic and Spanish as well. So they'll be trilingual by the time they go to kindergarten. And I thought that was the cutest story. So the young kids generally, again, schools offer multi-language learners, certified teachers who can teach children who don't know English. But They learn their content in English. They kind of, the supports that come in are more teaching contextual English, so that they're learning the English they need to know in order to understand what's going on. Not an easy thing. I would not want to do it myself.
And similarly for the adults who, if they don't speak English, but they need to get a job and be in the workforce, your guys are providing that English language training, or are there other trainings that they access?
Yeah, so we're among a large number of adult education providers in Rhode Island. So Rhode Island is one of the few states I've been in that really invest in adult basic education. English learning is one of them, as well as GED prep. And so, yes, we do that. And so we teach general, what we call survival skill English, how to get around day to day. But we also, as I mentioned, some of the partnerships with job training programs. We have some on-site, but we also partner. What we do is teach contextualized English to that industry, so that students can learn English either in a team teaching atmosphere while they're learning the technical skills. We have a construction, basic carpentry training that folks are enrolled in. It's team teaching. We're teaching the names of the tools while they're learning how to use the tools. Or we do like a bridge. We'll teach you the contextualized English you need to know in order to be successful when you do enroll in a manufacturing program or that kind of thing. So it's a combination of things, but that really is that's our role in the whole English for adults, is to ensure they're learning the things they need to learn as quickly as they can.
Great. I'm going to jump back to food for a second, because I have a couple of questions about, and we talked a little bit about this in the beginning with you, and Andrew, you may want to jump back in here. Where do refugees get their food from, and who pays for it? And is there a food pantry at Dorcas, or what does that all look like? And I guess, what does it look like in the immediate and in the medium and longer term?
So I would say in general, and please, Andrew, jump in, because we've had several of these conversations over time. So we do encourage and introduce newly arrived families to their local food pantry. We don't have a pantry on site, but we do trying to get folks enrolled in their, wherever it is, the closest one. And otherwise, they are buying their food in the grocery store, as Andrew was mentioning earlier, with the funds that they're earning, right? Again, we raised additional funds this time for the Afghans, specifically because at the time, we didn't know if they would be entitled to SNAP benefits or access. I think they always have access to food pantries, but whether the foods would be culturally appropriate. But again, I'll kick it over to you, Andrew, because you guys came through with everything culturally appropriate as well as delivery.
Yeah, I absolutely think that the model that we used in working together with the new arrivals from Afghanistan would be the model that we would use going forward, and certainly with the folks who are going to be coming from the Ukraine, which is, you want people to arrive to a full refrigerator and a full pantry in their homes with food that is familiar to them. And then you want to introduce them to the supermarket as quickly as possible. And if they don't have money and they haven't started working yet, of course, that's going to take time, then the gift cards, knowing where the local member agency of the food bank is, connecting people with those resources critical, particularly during that initial period before folks are able to have enough income to shop for themselves.
Right. I don't want to run out of time. There's a few questions about volunteer opportunities and how can people get involved in helping with the resettlement process and welcoming families here to Rhode Island.
So very quickly, I will direct folks to either our website at diiri.org, and it's how to help. and you get the drop down, and folks can volunteer, connect with our volunteer coordinator, who will set up a conversation with them. There's also AfghanReliefRI.org, which was set up as a common for Afghan relief, both in fundraising, but it directs you to the same place in terms of how to help. So if it's easier to remember AfghanReliefRI.org than it is our funny initials, then
and is there any particular need that's most needed in terms of where you might need volunteer assistance? And I should really get a update from my volunteer coordinator before I come on and do the. One of the things, because folks are not always in Providence or always close to where they're working, at least initially when arrivals come, we need people to volunteer to drive folks to appointments, or to, we work with them, folks, to try to get to work and back, because that's going to have to happen every day. But when folks initially come, there's a lot of different appointments, Social Security office, DHS, a bunch of different places they need to go for appointments. That's one of the, and it's kind of an easy one, because you can say, no, I'm busy today, I can't do it. That's a one-off. But we always also need what I call the mentors, or those neighbors that are willing to, help someone figure out what to do on trash night. This is how those kinds of things. Like, I call it neighbor help. Those are two areas that I think we could always use. And there's a couple of questions about whether it's only refugees, or do you also help undocumented immigrants or refugees? And secondary, are you involved in advocacy around refugee issues? And is there anything people can do to support in that arena if you are?
Okay, great. Yes, we work with everyone. So we do work with undocumented immigrants in a variety of services. We obviously don't work with them in employment services, although we know they need employment. But legal services or English classes or others of our services are open to anyone. We don't ask whether they're documented or not. In terms of, what was the second part of the question?
If you're involved in any advocacy around, helping those folks.
Yeah, so we do belong to the Immigrant Coalition of Rhode Island. We're one of like 30 agencies that do the state and local advocacy, driver's licenses for all, or health insurance for all children, those kinds of advocacy. With regard to refugee advocacy, our national affiliate is U.S. Committee of Refugees and Immigrants, and basically they guide our advocacy efforts at the national level with regard to refugees specifically, and or immigrants. And then there's a RCUSA is a organization that really just advocates on behalf of refugees in general at the federal national level.
Great. I just have a couple more questions. I know we're at time, but if you have another minute, I'll throw them out there quickly. This is a more broad questions around numbers of refugees, like the numbers for Syrians and other Middle Eastern refugees versus Central America, Haitians, or other Afghan countries. Maybe you can speak broadly to that. And then the second one is, where are the Afghan refugees located around Rhode Island? In which communities did folks land?
So I'm not from Rhode Island, so I'm not going to remember all 13, but they're located in 13 communities: Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls, Warren, West Warwick. We've got a family in Wickford, and had some in Cumberland. So it's been mostly in the urban core where most of the housing is, but there have been some widespread. So 13 cities and towns, and the variety that you saw on the slide, it's a pretty large variety of people we work with. The largest number that we resettle in Rhode Island is a Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, and then a smattering of Iraq, Ukraine, and we have resettled a few from Ukraine. The children, the unaccompanied children that come are primarily all from Central America, coming over the border. There are a few exceptions to that, but so I don't have hard numbers, I apologize. But
that's great. I think that gives a sense. I do want to mention before I turn it back over, just to close it out, as you guys are doing your 100th anniversary, we are bringing back our truck stop food truck tasting event on June 3rd. Tickets just went on sale today. There's a link in the chat. So we are looking forward to welcoming people back in person as well to celebrate and to raise some funds. But I want to thank you both. And Andrew, I'll turn it back over to you just to wrap things up.
Thank you, Lisa. And a giant thank you to you, Kathy. This was terrific and really, really helpful in terms of all of us understanding more about the experience of folks who are resettled, specifically for the Afghanistan evacuees. This has just been a great education, a great session for everybody. So really, thank you.
well, thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity, because I do think the more people understand, it can get complicated. And so I'm available anytime. But thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. And we'll be in touch with our next town hall. And in the meantime, come to the Dorcas International Centennial Celebration, June 23rd. Come to Truck Stop on June 3rd. We'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.